This video contains spoilers for the Imprisoned Turnabout, in addition to recapping parts of Turnabout Target. For the best experience, it is highly recommended to watch the series in order. Disclaimer complete. Enjoy the show. In the last episode, we've established that Turnabout Target has successfully managed to set up numerous plot threads, each of which carry great intrigue. Turnabout Target proved fun enough to make it easy to overlook the low-quality writing upon first viewing, and so the next case has the burden of carrying the first case's legacy. But does it stick the landing? That's right, the Imprisoned Turnabout destroys all semblance of actual fun that manifested in the first case, which is inexcusable considering the sheer consistency of GK1's quality. I will admit that I typically find Ace Attorney's second cases to be the least interesting among the rest in their respective games, but there are obvious exceptions to that rule. Regarding GK2, however, this is the biggest nosedive in quality I've ever seen between cases, right next to the Rite of Turnabout moving into Turnabout Storyteller. Consistency is still important, despite the inevitability that some cases will underwhelm in some areas relative to the others. Say Turnabout Academy relative to the rest of the GS5 cases, but that's just an example. The Imprisoned Turnabout, however, is infamous for being one of the lowest rated cases in GK2, if not the lowest rated, among other contenders such as Turnabout Target and formerly the Forgotten Turnabout, both of which are ironically far better than this mess of a time waste. The reason for this boils down to one major problem. It's insanely boring. For the supposed best entry in the entire series, this may just be the most boring Ace Attorney case I've ever seen. And since I actually know this thing called pacing the GK2 evidently does not, let's jump in right away. We fade into the detention center where Horace Yeardley is supposed to show up to what is apparently an interrogation from Meckles, who starts wondering why Yeardley isn't waffling over to the screen in heavy clunky armor. The unlikable party heads over to the mysterious development, the whoa, how did that happen scenario that Takeshi Yamazaki is surprisingly good at. Remember how Knightley had a neck injury? It would only make sense to impale his neck and have him die of blood loss, since it would be thematically interesting otherwise. Gumshoe compares the cloth to his supposedly dirty trench coat in a way that is so self-aware, it's as if the writers are somehow convinced that you still think this is Gumshoe. Meckles tells Kay not to steal Yeardley's ring because it bears relevance to the next case. I don't need to tell you why this scene is uninteresting. Kay regurgitates a line which was stolen from GK1, the black sheep of Ace Attorney, in much the same way Fire Emblem Gaiden is the black sheep of the Fire Emblem series. Poor GK1 gets no credit for said line, and yet GK2 makes a joke about it. The groovy Gabby swag walks his way into the scene, introducing himself as Raymond DeShields, angry at Meckles because of his relationship with Manfred von Karma. Meckles somehow recognizes Ray even though they never met at any previous point in the trilogy, nor was he mentioned at any point in GK1. Did I forget to mention that it's really annoying when people praise a game for, quote, saying the thing, unquote, and acting like it's funny? I mean, this chump is so lame that he's never going to get his own game. He's still a lot better than the scumbag though. Stop talking like that. It's not funny, and it just proves why I said about him getting shouty at others for just showing up. This is the second time Meckles puts the leash back on, proving how unhinged this man is for no other reason than Gumshoe is supposedly a terrible character. Because he's so stupid, right? Because watching him be so unlikable that even Raymond Shields making a joke at his expense somehow felt kinda good. And gosh, it gets worse. I don't even remember Gumshoe thinking this far ahead, when it makes more sense for Meckles to do it. Like, just look at this arrogant piece of muck mountain from Conker's Bad Fur Day. Literally, I can't stand these characters. Logic chess was J. Elbert aside, Raymond mentions who is presumably Phoenix Wright, which is why the malleable mech gets a strong reaction and tries to gloss over it. The writing is so bad that the morons get scared over locked up prisoners to cause a non-existent ruckus, which compels Justine Courtney to intervene. You know, I personally wish she did speak in Shakespearean. Would have been more interesting than what we actually got, because this next exchange between Courtney and Raymond is horrendous. The reason why it's so bad is because Ray was opening up his predictable hug joke, and the punchline is Courtney responding with a mechanical, unfunny line that is still being treated as a joke. This is not good humor, however you slice it. Sure, she's telling him that the PIC can punish him for interfering with the investigation or whatever, but she's just shutting down the joke being presented by Ray. I gotta agree with this guy though. Even though his introduction is very lame, regurgitating non-jokes repeatedly every other 2 seconds. Alright, it is now time to talk about Turnabout Target again, because Courtney explains to Meckles that he has in fact committed crimes. The first thing she mentions is extraterritorial rights, and we already know that Meckles arrogantly opposed them, as evident throughout this conversation between the 2 robots. It's worth mentioning that Machine never brought up the president granting Meckles permission, which was something the latter did fight for, meaning she's ultimately the bad guy here. Also, for someone who outright said he was willing to break the rules, he was forced to board the plane on behalf of Shelley the Killer, so the plot's simply patting Meckles on the back. The story presented the characters with obstacles, and yet the way Meckles went through it made him look so blindly obsessed with the truth that he is willing to overstep boundaries, when Edgeworth as a character has been shown to carry much more self-restraint. He isn't one to violate the law, and that's why it's so infuriating that Meckles is never really punished for acting out of character. It doesn't make him morally grey either, since it's clear that the PIC are clearly 100% pure evil. Know something insanely dumb though? Meckles literally says he does not accept Courtney's threat. And then she said she will delay for another time, like what? This is plot armor, guys. Supposedly it's too early for something this dramatic to happen, considering it's most dramatic, where it's used in the 4th case when Courtney doesn't even do it, all for the sake of a superficial theme. It turns out that Imprisoned is a 3-day case, and guess whose face is looking so angry besides that of Non-Gumshoe, because never mind that, it is Non-Gumshoe. Like please, just call him the Phantom or something like that, because there's nothing more infuriating than the writers pretending to know who Gumshoe is, but demonstrating literally no knowledge of how to actually write him. Little details like that do add up. We meet the supposed best Capcom antagonist of all time, who is actually boring! He decides to waste our time by refusing to talk until Knightley is brought up, before making fun of the punk. Here, Ray should have said merry band of unlikable scumbags, the most pretentious of them harassing him again. Meckles explains Edgeworth's character development because remember, they're 2 separate characters, and the only reason this is spoiled to the audience is because it is very relevant to GK2's story. Again, we will hyperfixate on it come Act 5, so for now, Ray's best moment intervenes, which we'll talk about in Act 7, though what he says here is later contradicted as time goes on. He mentions his love interest, Meckles' father, Meckery. This case is ostensibly foreshadowing the next case, which will be covered in the next episode, so yeah, no weird case order here. Back to the scene. Last I checked, Gumshoe isn't proactive enough to think this far ahead. Why don't you think ahead on how to respect Gumshoe's characterization, writers? Stupid Face references GS3's best case, only for Kay to outright completely invalidate the entire premise of GK2's story, because what she says is really a summation of what the writers were really thinking, roughly translating to, yeah, we don't give a rat's posterior, we're not even gonna try. Because Meckles has no heart, he threatens Rodent Man by literally saying he will show no mercy. Is this the formula for a likable protagonist? You're the one doing the harassment, scumbag. Since this guy is on the receiving end of so much cruelty, let's have Gregory read out his name in the script, every so often. Like this. Raymond! Raymond outright tells us about the pun behind the defendant's name, only for Kay to do what is called explaining the joke. This defeats the purpose of the pun. The reason Spirit of Justice's wacky pun names are usually funnier is because nobody ever directly acknowledges them because GS6's writers weren't grasping at straws all the time, and had the self-restraint to not explain the puns. GK2, however, is so respectful as to explain the joke, am I right? Back to the scene. Meckles pretends that this isn't his first time acting as a subordinate to someone who has access to investigative rights while he doesn't, even though such a thing was never shown in any of the previous entries. GS1. At best, he was in full control of every case which he prosecuted. Same thing for Farewell My Turnabout in GS2. GS3, he was taking over for Phoenix Wright and never had his investigative rights stripped away. GK1 was the first game where Edgeworth had his investigative rights threatened, but not once did he act as a subordinate to someone else. Clearly, some kind of insignificant case happened off screen and is only there because this guy is already perfect and never encountered this new novel idea before. Raymond reminds Edgeworth that he will not forgive him for supposedly idolizing Manfred, a fact that Edgeworth just glosses over and is never punished for at any point in the game. Manta Ray ends up forgiving Meckles mere seconds after the fact. How inconsistent. Gumshoe tries to talk some sense into Raymond by talking smarter than Brainy Smurf in a pretentious way, which Meckles even confirms is a cringy insult from Stupid Face. Kay also chimes in and outright worships Meckles just to convince Raymond that this robot is a good guy. Remember kids, Meckles is a good guy, therefore he's a paragon of perfection. Ray repeats what he just said nearly half a minute ago, before finally explaining the machinations of his romantic love, honoring his dead mentor whom he dearly respects. Raymond finally gives Meckles a chance to prove himself, before Meckles pulls out his Devolutionator. Seeing a valuable asset, Meckles requests the overly orderly scumbag, who says he can't help defense attorneys, even though the real Gumshoe did it time and time again, to infiltrate the enemy base, something which we will never get to see with our own eyes. Normally, scenes where characters plan their next moves are engaging to watch, but this one kinda sucked. At least Patricia Rowland waddles over to remind Raymond that he has a crush on Catherine Hall, before she gives him a big, undeserved smooch, to show us that yes, this is her character quirk. Speaking of quirks, Meckles mentions the poker face, which is chess terminology pertaining to bluffing, which was just exposited in such a boring way. During the second Logic Chess, Solid reveals his brand new catchphrase, which we won't get much into until Act 7. We basically use something we already knew as a clue, which is just odd since we should have always kept the Scream in mind. Clearly this game is out of its mind or something. At least they got this line right. Speaking of lines, I wish the middle Logic Chess selection choice went somewhere, but it's obviously there to guide you in the right direction. Yeah, the writers couldn't even think of a brain teaser for the alternative. Kay tries to remind Meckles of what he is now, which seemingly goes against what she said earlier about how it matters not what Meckles' job is. So why did she remind him of his current occupation? How inconsistent. Cue the switch from Allegro down to Moderato? What? We just had a big development, so wouldn't the opposite make more sense? I know it would be stupid to transition into Presto, but why make the switch, let alone do it incorrectly? At least there is some flavor in this shot. It's limited, but it stands out from the rest, not that it's even good anyway. Solid is surprisingly boring here, particularly due to his choppy and very, very dull dialogue. He literally says, "That is correct," a line shared with Dane Gustavia. How consistent. It's not until more member berry juice comes gushing out that he finally says a decent line, and don't you dare quote Keiji Shinogi. Oh, but wait, there is more. Solid tells you that he had gloves. Not a moment later and you immediately present that. Why did they literally spoil the answer? That just makes the evidence prompt pointless. And this isn't the only time GK2 does this. It's honestly even stupider once you consider that Meckles points out Solid is missing one of his gloves. One's in your possession, and the other is right inside Solid's apron. It shouldn't be difficult to phrase the prompt in a way where the player should think about this before Meckles explains it.
Objection!
He's boasting about his voice clip, which isn't even useful in the grand scheme. But at least it's got some charm to it. The not Jin Ibushi guard tries to deliver his own charm, but drops it mere seconds after the fact. How inconsistent. What is more mysterious than Meckles' core concern about this case is how Meckles knew exactly who was being kept in the special cell. Kay wastes more time with her own song playing in the most unfitting setting they could imagine, before the dog's eyes act as a blue lightsaber, which has been activated by the Sith Emperor as a celebration of his triumph over the Jedi. From this we can deduce that Meckles was an elite battle droid, since he apparently got involved with Sheev Han Palpatogine.
It seems we know each other quite well. Otherwise, my dialogue might as well be the worst thing you've ever seen.
It isn't long before it becomes apparent that Dogen is the most obvious red herring ever made, a testament to this case's tendency to just meander along without accomplishing anything. Dogen is allowed access to chisels to carve out chess pieces and Buddha statues which he must visualize via touch, because remember, he's blind. This is why he plays correspondence chess, which sounds more like a bunch of form threads being put together back to back. It doesn't really make much sense how Dogen knew of Knightley's death independent of external intel, not to mention how he so nonchalantly knew of the false charge Knightley was being indicted of. I ironically never paid attention to this bit, but it's never brought up again. It's only really done to confirm that yes, the PIC are twisting the truth to protect the president, who is indeed related to the PIC, as you will see in a later episode. After a flashback showing General Lang demanding to see Zumina and Ubello from the Grustian castle, Dogen, who was boringly exchanging mechanically delivered compliments with Meckles, now claims that Meckles can't be trusted before immediately reassuring him that he wasn't the only one to suspect him, which implies that he does trust Meckles? How inconsistent. Ray is axed from the script, Kay traps herself on a simulation of Mount K9, and Meckles uses Blitzcrank's rocket grab to reunite with the less intelligent of the two morons, just so they proceed to eavesdrop on Patricia Rowland, who brushes the unlikable stupid faces off. Speaking of stupid faces, Kay tells Meckles to focus on the case in the most condescending way possible. So this is our idea of being smart? General Lang trudges through in his heavy armor and complains about the boredom of managing his Arcanine troop divisions, though I'd argue that it's nowhere near as boring as watching these scenes back to back in one sitting. For the record, I honestly think Lang is only here for no reason other than to create
Link. And member berries. We definitely want more of that, don't we?
We get a seemingly unimportant testimony from a guard where one of his uniforms has gone missing. And let me tell you, this is where I'm starting to generate melatonin. Because while the case is moving, the way in which it's moving is very problematic. And I'm just gonna say it. Every single part of the investigation up to this point has been structured and framed in this very self-serious, over-objective, expositionary, most importantly slow, and an overall very boring tone that just never changes. The evidence is being stockpiled like Byzantine tribute offerings to the Huns. The logic is steadily evolving, but the dialogue is so derivative and identical sounding that you swear you're reading the same book repeatedly. We are 2.5 hours in, and this garbage got stale an hour ago. We're just sitting here, waiting for something exciting to happen, but nothing does. It's not until Ray is pulled back into the script that something finally happens to change the status quo. And what do we get? We get a lame testimony from Sebastian de Pest, which even Meckles mentions took way too long, proving that the writers were self-aware about that fact, and yet did nothing about it. For a game so hell-bent on exposition, Sebastian is literally wasting our time with his inability to pick up on words, which should have been introduced earlier so that he wasn't just stuck saying he's the best all the time. But no, introduce this new quirk now to waste our precious time when the characters have done nothing to redeem themselves in the eyes of the player. While on the topic of pacing, here's a fun fact. I've been watching the footage on double speed, making going through GK2 a lot more bearable, and it's still boring. But upon switching to the base speed, I noticed that the text speed is very, and I mean very, slow. People complain about the Great Ace Attorney's pacing, and yet fail to recognize that this 2011 game has it infinitely worse. I'll explain about that in greater detail come episode 6. One decent line later, Kay is buffooning around again for the umpteenth time. The fan translators had some fun at least. Machine. She reveals information that appears terrifying at first, but all it really does is just give us more angles for examination. I don't really get why Meckles pretends to appear phased other than to make Machine Courtney look more impressive than she really is, before she literally threatens to revoke Edgeworth of his badge, which doubles the effect. This isn't even mentioning how she's completely aware Meckles is utilizing Raymond as a ploy to keep her judgment off him, even before she oh so superficially praised Ray for his honorific intentions. This particular act does levy some level of tension, but it didn't have to take 2.5 hours to get to this point. So back to the detention center we go. Linguini from Ratatouille talks about daddy issues, which prompts Raymond to remind Meckles of his father, as in he just regurgitates what Ray said but in a question. Ray makes a weak Indiana Jones reference with Meckles, then almost so randomly presents the Rat Man with candy, which he hates because of all the things he could remember. This was what he could remember. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Kay gets what she deserves by getting smacked by a Dravidian battle elephant. I wish it were Chimera so she would be mutilated, though that doesn't happen because Regina Barry is back, and Kay outright admits that they almost sound the same. I guess that to join Kay's second Yatagarasu, you must be a girl, and you must be energetic, stupid, and fun-loving. In comes Sod, who has nothing to say besides reminding us how great Doggin is.
We're just suppliers.
Regina references the most critiqued part about GS2. How not superficial, am I right? Also, even if I were a kid, I would find her
storyline
boring, and I loved elephants as a kid. Roland shows up to do something completely superfluous, which is actually making her look more suspicious. Why would she see a need to praise just Frank Sot when he isn't doing anything of value? Also, she must have really bad taste in music, because nobody actually likes the music playing on screen. However, I will admit, Roland isn't terrible to watch. Pan back to generic Final Fantasy cave, only for Meckles to ask my question for me. Thanks! On funny chisel joke aside, the Phantom eats chocolate cake to prevent Missile from consuming chocolate, which is poisonous to dogs. In a painful attempt at being funny, the Phantom proves that he never actually knew Kay by not sharing with her, while the real Gumshoe went to great lengths to give her a Swiss roll with next to no funds. I think the reason Missile is barking at him so excessively is a pretty good indication of something telling. Missile knows something isn't right. The scent doesn't match. So the man with the wrong scent leads the way once again, only for us to find that there's a hidden tunnel, which Kay goes inside of fearlessly, foolishly, and without hesitation. J.J. Abrams apparently found a way out, which flusters Roland, who sets things straight. Now she mentions Doggin boasting, which is also something mentioned by Frank Sot. These guys are just overhyping Doggin like crazy, failing to show us any of his machinations, because GK2 is almost entirely tell don't show. Oh no, it's the pretentious punk from before, whose behavior warrants a punch, but GK2 won't allow us the privilege of having that catharsis, because Meckles ostensibly invalidating her threat only makes the supposed antagonist a lot weaker than the plot is suggesting. Vying for attention, Courtney makes another threat, and then this line comes to fruition. Why does Gumshoe say the word deprive? Did Gumshoe ever say that word before? I use it quite often, and I can confirm that it doesn't fit Gumshoe's speech pattern. Oh boy, why do I even bother? Meckles feebly tries to remind Courtney that he knows she's aware of his plan for the sake of repetition for the umpteenth time before we face off against the most unlikable character in the history of anything ever for the first time. Machine is tenacious and robotic, incapable of showing any emotional reaction to a hole in her logic. Meckles points out said inconsistency, that she immediately rebukes perfectly. She is literally a Mary Sue girl boss at this point. Meckles betrays the silent Phantom by pointing attention to him, which yields yet another empty threat from Machine, but towards the Phantom this time, leading into Sebastian getting dogged on by the Dogman before Machine pulls the stunt done by the real Edgeworth in GS1. The only fair thing the scumbag does is give us a copy of the autopsy report, seemingly for no reason, which goes against her threats towards Meckles and Raymond, the latter of whom we could infer she only pretended to like. How inconsistent. What is consistent, however, is that these two are basically the same person talking to themselves in a mirror. Ray interrupts the mirror madness by reminding Meckles what it means to be a defense attorney in honor of his old man. Anyway, Machine decides to entertain Meckel's deduction despite adamantly refusing to stake his claims. You know what? Forget it. I've regurgitated this joke ad nauseum already. Kay remarks about how edgy Doggin is, which is very telling of a severe lack of variety we'll unearth in Act 7. After a good 10 minutes of Machine spouting robot lines of case-relevant logic, to the point Raymond becomes one of them, Meckles claims he is an assistant at his father's firm, cementing himself as a
Defense attorney.
just so he can completely drop that attitude after this case. Kay tries to act smart because she is officially just moral support at this point, leading to Meckles and Machine coming to a sound conclusion. The Phantom presents Mr. Analysis in a superficial attempt to be Gumshoe because what piqued my curiosity is however the heck Gumshoe of all people talks like this. He goes on to explain the mechanics of video analysis, which was done before in both GS1's divisive DLC case and GS4's thoroughly reviled third case. Though watching Meekin sneak his way into Goodman's dwellings is a guilty pleasure of mine, as is the burning guitar video, I do think this video was by far the most well utilized, as it is only used once just like in GS1, but a lot more straightforward. We deduced that Rocky the bear turned from a polar bear into a black sun bear thanks to Sod's mud packs, which begs the question, why does he feel the need to inexplicably cover animals with mud for no other reason than for Rocky to resemble Nasus in that video? Someone please tell me, how can dipping animals in mud improve their quality of life? This is clearly a contrivance, and Toatali Reviews even said that forcing the prison to have an animal motif is only done to service the mystery in a contrived way, because there was no other way to change the polar bear's color, and Yamazaki wanted you to believe that the animal jumping the man in the footage was Anubis. There's nothing inherently wrong with this case writing bit, but there's no direct reasoning behind it. Thankfully, this awful case does have a magnum opus, which you're seeing right now. Enter Jar Jar Elbird, who requests evidence only to get brutally smashed by an invisible robot arm. Machine flinches for once in her life, and Sebastian the Useless cries for the umpteenth time. However, the former is a blatant lie because she literally creates an elaborate scheme to pin the blame on the little mouse by matching his at the time known location with a corpse relocation method involving tunnels and gravity, meaning that our final destination will be the courtyard, with the Age of Empires 1 hostile huntables, Sans the Lion, and Tiger. I may be using too much Age of Empires terminology here. Roland incriminates herself, delaying the investigation by another day, and for some reason Machine inexplicably decides to spare Meckles to try proving that she isn't the most unlikable character ever, even though the plot is clearly giving Meckles another pat on the back. My thoughts exactly. This line is surprisingly okay. Kay gets her odd turnabout target moment, suggesting that Missile help out again. Enter the Phantom via phone call, and he immediately annoys the player with his condescending attitude. No, that isn't Gummy, you idiot. Don't try convincing me that you're smarter than you really are, just by giving us the little thief section, which was only added so that the writers could persuade the player into thinking this moron had any story pertinent value. Easy name to remember, huh? Why is Kay so offended over the silly idea that Meckles came up with? How is it an insult to the elephant? Kay is an infinitely easier name to remember, so what logical sense does that make? Ah, speak of the devil. Her words, not mine. Regina Berry intervenes to say,
Hello, I came entirely guess I could spice up the dialogue. It's getting quite boring in here, so let's say it's like magic because it isn't.
I'm going to say it don't scare me none because I usually don't speak in this voice because the writers don't know what I should sound like. Better stick to a comfort zone like what I was doing a couple minutes ago.
Stealing things is my profession. I am only using little thieves to fantasize about what locks I can pick because that item is criminally underutilized in Fire Emblem games. Hey everyone, look! I wanna see that!
Shut your mouth, Kay! That looks boring. You know what? Scratch that. I wanna punch this guy, because that would be amusing. Oh, I'm not supposed to? Ah, yep, this is the part of the game where we play as Gumshoe, which sadly can't be counted as a W. The best part about this fun little sequence is that Gumshoe's 2009 song plays. which is a shame because I really don't feel like I'm playing Gumshoe at all. Upon examining the well resources in the Little Thief's third and hopefully final act, we deduced that yes, Courtney was right the whole time because Yeardley was indeed dropped from the well. Definitely not a Mary Sue girl boss, am I right? From this revelation, Meckles finally concludes that Doggin can be ruled out, and upon realizing the cause of the security camera's time display discrepancy, sets his sights onto jolly old Roland.
I have many matters which require my attention.
Who talks like that? She then goes on to regurgitate her threat, despite sparing his badge because she felt like playing nice that day.
Oh, my apologies. I had forgotten that you were assisting the defense attorney.
Can I take a moment to say how much I hate this character? This isn't funny or charming, it just makes you despise this empty husk even more. What fantastic writing you have right there.
I would advise you to choose your words more carefully. Have you forgotten that the fate of your badge rests in my hands?
Nice job, scumbag. Your threat is getting emptier and emptier by the hour, which begs the question, and it bears repeating. Why did you let Meckles get off scot-free? This is plot armor, guys. Gotta save that one for a list of twos. Sebastian chimes in to remind us that Courtney is very strong with the dark side of the Force, although Courtney herself decides to update the autopsy report seemingly out of nowhere, which contradicts her zoink move from before. Speaking of, Courtney gets irritated with Meckles being Raymond's assistant for the umpteenth time and stops beating around the bush, although she fails to explain exactly why the unorthodoxy is bad. Meckles then says this line, which literally proves that he doesn't actually care about being a defense attorney. He only did it because it was the right time to do it. That's because you have a RAM and infinite amounts of memory cards. Plus, you are the strongest computer brain robot in existence. Enter Patricia Rowland, who has been cemented as the boss of this case, and it isn't long before scumbag Courtney comes to her defense.
I am not amused. Interrupting my judgment only to be silent.
You know what? I wish you were silent. Okay, I think that's enough lying critique. When Roland admits to allying with Frank Sod to pass the electric fence, she decides to pay respect to a stupid face with no likability by referring to the goddess of law and seemingly losing her motherly voice. I understand she's defending herself, but she sounds almost exactly like Meckles and Courtney in the scene. She then reveals the whole reason behind turning off the security camera, which is all rooted in her fear of Sirhan Doggin. Sure, we could see it coming, but doesn't this feel off somehow? Isn't this too big a revelation to reveal at this point, especially with such little resistance on Patricia's part? Aren't you noticing something? Well, first of all, the pacing has gotten a lot better. But it's too little, too late. The case is already coming to a close, and after nearly 5 hours of boring, glacial scenes with some more interesting scenes peppered at random intervals, the only conclusion that can be drawn here is that the writers are starting to get bored, and are blitzing through the boss battle like it's not even part of the case. It's quite jarring to say the least. Back to the game. Ray shocks everyone only to foreshadow the third case in such an awkward time in an unfunny way. Also, Courtney asks Raymond if he's the defense attorney of this case, the answer of which she already knows, so clearly she is disrespecting Ray on purpose, which he thankfully manages to pick up on. Okay dude, we get it. You love Catherine Hall, though not as much as you love Gregory. Why is Roland always shifting her voice? In her second testimony, she is trying to add some flavor and emotion in her dialogue, and that's a welcome change, even though it is short-lived. She even jokes about how supposedly cute Meckles is, which is better than the alternative, which has been used for 98% of the case's total dialogue, though it comes across as cringe. Third testimony. You press Roland on the statement regarding Yeardley getting back to his cell, where she literally points out the nonsensicality behind her character. I promise we'll get to that in a bit. Patricia Rowland outwits even Machine, which is a nice achievement since the latter has no flaws otherwise, by saying the supposed murder weapon is too flimsy to inflict the killing blow. The Phantom strikes at poor Ray yet again before Meckles supposedly loses hope, to which Kay and Ray say, "No, we can't give up, there's still a way out of this." I love how even though Raymond kept preaching about the defense attorney mantra of never giving up, it is Kay who is doing that here to justify her existence in this game. I'm saying that she's hogging screen time from this newly introduced character who is supposedly far better versed in that kind of stuff than she is. All Raymond does is remind Meckles that he's the main character, and at this point, Meckles gains the upper hand after Machine decides to betray the only bad girl in the game, again, to try to trick the audience into thinking she's a likable character somehow. There is this little moment with Sebastian that I do like, where he weakly accepts defeat to Meckles before smugly turning him down, but it's so short-lived that you really do have to dig to find something good here. Meckles pulls a wink-wink to the audience, referring to that man, Phoenix Wright, copying Machine's dictionary rhetoric from before, ultimately arriving to the conclusion that Allie the alligator was concealing the true murder weapon, which was something we couldn't see in the very scene leading up to this reveal because she ran away when it was most convenient. I appreciate having to prove the player's mettle was the case and evidence to justify how the battle played out, but it feels contrived in this instance. Also, the unlikable main cast should have pursued the metal detector's reaction to Allie, not casually drop it and wait for the opportune moment to present this bit of information when things got tense. Again, this case is obsessed with meandering. I think the same effect could have been achieved if the party was concerned about the strongest reaction from the metal detector in order to find the weights, without showing the scene where said party had their eyes fixed on an alligator who just escaped because the plot demanded it. I understand why this scene was added, it was so players could think back to it in order to make the finishing blow, but I think it could have been executed better. The deed is done. With the knife harvested from the reptile, Patricia Rowland admits defeat, and here's where I'm going to stop playing nice. Patricia Rowland, you are a colossal moron. Instead of killing Knightley for no other reason than to make GK2 look cooler than it actually is, you have more than enough power and resources to kill Doggett. You don't need to be so afraid of him when he is sitting behind bars, unable to harm you himself. If you were actually smart, you would just go up to him, shoot him with a pistol, and stay in your bunker with your trained police guards to defend you from his retaliating henchmen you fear so much. But sadly, you are being forced to do this. You are doing this nonsensical, stupid thing on behalf of the plot. I don't care if you're afraid of Doggett. If you had to kill someone, you should kill the person you fear and despise the most. Killing out of fear is a thing, you know. However, you come up with the brilliant idea to use your fear to kill a lesser threat, who is only tied to Doggett through freaking correspondence chess. In a prison this well defended, Doggett's threat should be meaningless, especially if you kill him yourself, so that you won't have to live in fear of him forever. But what do? You spoil Doggett, you give him all that power which he, by all rights, should not have access to. You have never seen a glimpse of resistance, which is why you gave up so easily, save for the true murder weapon's location. Is this trying to convey the themes of the power of not giving up, lending credence to Raymond's mantra? Maybe that is the point, but considering the setting you were in, Doggett should not be able to sway you, period. Your brain is the size of a micron, which contradicts how you orchestrated a nearly perfect crime where these supposedly heroic robots had to spend so much time meandering to understand even a tiny sliver of how this case actually worked. We will meet again come episode 7, for it is now time to wrap things up. Sebastian the Best claims all the praise that is obviously undeserved because Meckles did all the work. Machine chastises and blames Meckles for everything before finally taking her long overdue leave of absence. Enter the now freed Ratman, who says bad things about Knightley, apparently because Knightley pushed him into a vehicle, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Case also presents us with a magazine that foreshadows a later case, and Max Galactica is on the front cover, yet he's too hard for these amateurs to write to warrant physically showing up. So Regina and her rodent pet leave the scene because they're done, leading into Raymond, complimenting Meckles for saving the day as a defense attorney. The next line makes it quite clear that Meckles does not like being a defense attorney because he's too stone-faced and robotic to even feel for Kigis, who is now a free man because of his efforts. No, he did it because it was the right thing to do. More on that in a later episode. Ray tries convincing Meckles to turn for the last time in this case, before Stupid Face harasses him for the umpteenth time. How funny.
Normal, pal!
You know what isn't normal? Your behavior. If Raymond had an actual spine, he would rightfully chastise you for your immense cruelty, but no, he doesn't. After Ray leaves the scene, Meckles finally thinks more about honoring his father's legacy with the appropriate GS1 backstory to boot. Unfortunately, this scene does nothing for Edgeworth's character. Rather, it only serves to foreshadow the very next case, which will be the subject of the next episode, and the imprisoned turnabout is finally cast behind bars. Before we enter the realm of closing thoughts, we must first transition into the mystery writing side of things, because remember, this is a Gyakuten Kenji game where that kind of stuff is important. I'll elaborate on this in greater detail in episode 6, or you can just ask in the comments. So if I were to rank the Imprisoned Turnabout regarding how it handles its mystery writing, it would be a 5 out of 10. This time there's only one good mystery element, but it is pretty significant. In general, the Imprisoned Turnabout does a pretty good job staying consistent with the logic and evidence given throughout the case as they evolve and work in tandem with each other. However, we unfortunately had to contend with the problematic. Indeed, the Imprisoned Turnabout is where the mystery writing takes a backseat to the plot, and due to the awful set-piece structure we'll get to in a bit, the actual mystery goes from riveting to kind of boring, despite the creativity of literally having to use a secret tunnel via a seemingly insignificant well to deliver goods to Dogen. In other words, the mystery itself is again the best part about the case, however less pronounced than it was in Turnabout Target, since the plot is so heavily prioritized over the mystery. Unlike Turnabout Target, some parts of the Imprisoned Turnabout's mystery feel contrived. For example, saw its mud packs from before, which were only used to change Rocky's color from white to black to serve the needs of the mystery. alley diving to stop the main cast from preemptively locating the knife also fits this designation because the writers pass it off as Regina telling the party that, oh, Allie doesn't feel so good. It's just frustrating. Alright, now for my closing thoughts. Obviously, the Imprisoned Turnabout has a lot of issues, to the point where I'd personally give it a 1 out of 10 in terms of overall quality. It barely moves, all the scenes feel the same, sans the few set pieces which harbor tension, which made up less than half of the case's runtime. Owing to this is how much filler this case has, from Sebastian's tacked-on testimony halfway through to the sheer length of many of these individual scenes, which is attributed to a lot of boring fluff. Kay just boasts about how supposedly useful she is, taking up more screen time than she actually needs, which ends up hurting Raymond, who simply doesn't do much, in the very case where he is introduced as a powerful ally, taking a backseat to Meckles, the Phantom, and especially Kay, who handles a lot of talking points that better suit Ray, begging the question as to why he's even in the case outside of foreshadowing the Inherited Turnabout, the third case of GK2. That's not even mentioning how unlikable the characters are, as I can't really find myself liking any of them here, unlike in the first case. Not even Ray, not even Roland, Regina, or the Ratman. They all kind of suck. This is just a boring, pretentious, and annoying case where every line of dialogue just makes you wish this case ended a lot sooner. In fact, no joke, when I first played this case for the first time in late 2019, I genuinely wanted the case to end just 2 hours in, and I got the exact same feeling upon replay, so it'll always be relevant. 2 hours in. No other case I've ever played before has ever left me feeling, well, imprisoned. Even cases I don't like, such as Reunion and Turnabout, as well as the Stolen Turnabout, gave me some kind of motivation to keep going. They ended up disappointing, sure, but at least I never begged them to end as I was playing. Reunion and Turnabout, for example, does have boring investigations, absolutely, but none of their scenes felt identical in how they played out. Characters would move from room to room, and new evidence would appear in places they weren't before, such as the incinerator. The scenes feel fresh, even if the pacing is the same. In Prison, though, same structure each time, sans battle sections. Plot, more plot, we get to actually play the game for a bit, enter an unlikable character, more plot, yet more plot, rinse and repeat. Sure, there are subtle differences here and there, such as Raymond proving to be even more cowardly than Cade was when running away from Doggin after he scared them, leading to Meckles taking Kay to the prison cell, where a lot of plot is exposited. Cade becomes annoying as we play, then more plot before we finally discover the wiped bloodstain after the most unlikable character shows up, which is ironically part of the case's Jar Jar Binks escape subplot, which had very little to do with the actual case. Just a lot of meandering, slow-paced, nearly identically framed scenes lacking in flavor and variety. That's pretty much the main contributing factor behind why this case is so immeasurably boring. Many lines and details are repeated ad nauseum, seemingly to make the game easier in case you couldn't get said detail the first time, where Sawit's reliability, Nasus's Q stacks, and Meckles' ploy come to mind. Regardless of this decision's intent, it still pads out the runtime. It doesn't help that, and this is subjective on my part, I don't like the setting. Generic Final Fantasy cave with prison cells and a mountain-like protrusion. The courtyard might as well be the cave exit leading to grassy plains with some other ornaments tacked on. The only really interesting location would have to be the hallway transitioning from the detention center into the prison, so of course we spend the least amount of time there. It has a lot of color variety, and I like the dark prison cells in the background, not to mention the pathway which only the warden could access. That's pretty good. I know I didn't talk about the setting much in the previous case, but that's because there's nothing wrong with Turnabout Targus' setting. In conclusion, the Imprisoned Turnabout is a boring slogfest, and it has every right to harbor its detractors. The admittedly okay endgame was simply not enough to salvage the case's overextended runtime, a problem that is further exacerbated by the very next case. Oops. It seems like I got ahead of myself again. Oh, don't worry, you'll see what Ray and I have been alluding to once the next episode's jail time sentence elapses. Until next time!